And a warm welcome, everybody. My name's Janice Goldstraw-White, and I'm one of Martin Gill's colleagues at Perpetuity, and I'll be chairing today's session. Today, I believe, is the 146th Thought Leadership webinar, and today's topic, as we know, is the big issues impacting on security. What are they, and how can we plan for the future knowing these? So if you've seen one of these webinars before, then you're very welcome back. And if you haven't, then we hope you'll enjoy this session and return again for one of our future events. We're here actually every week, and we have been since lockdown, examining a topic of central interest to the security world. And the idea of thought leadership is we critique today in order to gain a better understanding for tomorrow. It's not our intention to try and solve everything in the world in one day, one webinar. More, we're trying to encourage new thinking and ideas and to debate what's going on and to put forward perspectives for change. And as always, a copy of this webinar will be put on our website, hopefully tomorrow, so it can be referred to in the future. Security is always in the news, but some say it takes a crisis for security to be seen as valuable. And COVID-19 has certainly represented a worldwide crisis, and that globally it appears to have put security centre stage. But when it's all over, what then? What have we learned from it? And what should we be thinking about? Another pandemic, perhaps? Austerity in the wake of economic hardship that much of the post-pandemic world is suffering? Or should we be thinking of something totally new? For example, how about commercial opportunities and new and improved commercial relationships for the security sector? So hopefully in this webinar, we'll address the following. What are the big issues facing security now? What factors will determine how security is perceived by key stakeholders as it emerges from the pandemic? And what are the next big risks and also the next major opportunities for the security sector? And so today we're going to hear from three expert panellists who have all spoken before on these webinars, who all have immense experience in this area from around the world. And we therefore look forward to hearing their thoughts on these matters. So without further ado, what I'm going to do in a second is to invite our panel to introduce themselves. And once I've done that, I'll ask them to make their opening statements, 3 to 4 minutes, when they get to say whatever they want on this topic. And after that, we'll ask you, the audience, to ask your questions. So can I encourage you to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen? And please try and get your questions in early, and we'll endeavour to include as many as we can in the ensuing discussion. So without further delay, let's go and meet our panel. Let's first go to Dennis. Dennis, please, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and welcome. And for those of you from the United States, happy Thanksgiving. I appear before you with over 40 years of investigative and security management experience, which encompasses work across the globe. My later years have been devoted to the education and training of security officers and management. And I continue to support ASIS International in that regard with their certification review programs and with the International Foundation of Protection Officers, IFPO, as a past chairman on their board of directors. Professional development, education, training are key components to the success of individuals working in the security industry. And the pandemic showed us how many organizations must manage and operate in the future. Security organizations and personnel are included. At this point, I'll dwell more on what to expect afterwards, after my colleagues introduce themselves.
Okay, thank you, Janice, and certainly something to come back to there. If I can now go to Rinska. Rinska, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Look, my name is Rinska Gerlings. I'm based in Australia for the last 23 years, originally from the Netherlands. We're born in the Netherlands with the ultimate risk management skill and fear for real risk, because our country is about 70 to 80% underwater. So I guess it got me very quickly interested in managing risk. I do three different things. One is the sort of enterprise risk management work, but also business continuity and information security. And business continuity, I guess the real difference that I try to make there is to get those business continuity plans from black text on white paper to actually something people can grab or actually live. So naturally that when an incident happens, they all know what to do. And I happen to work very closely with information security, but also especially physical security professionals on that, because they tend to be more leaning towards that practical knowledge and equipping people with that practical attitude when it comes to real incidents and how to manage them. So I look forward to hearing from the others on the panel and being part of this session. So thank you.
Thank you, Rinska. And then go to our final panelist. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And although Jan said we've all spoken before on these sessions, actually is a first for me, although I have spoken at other events before. So hi, I'm Mike White. I'm the head of risk, compliance and assurance for G4S Secure Solutions UK Limited. And my role covers the UK and Ireland. And now, of course, G4S is an allied universal business following the takeover of G4S back in April. I've got 21 years experience in the UK private security industry. Started off in operations before what some of my colleagues describe as moving to the dark side of risk management and compliance. And during the last 18 months or so, I've been part of our Gold Command structure with specific responsibility for business continuity through our business in the UK and Ireland. And a happy Thanksgiving to our US friends and more later.
Thank you very much, Mike. So we'll just go to our panelists in a minute to actually hear their opening statements. Those of you listening in the audience, can I just remind you to use your question and answer button at the bottom of the screen, get your questions in as soon as you can, and we'll endeavour to include as many as we can. Now I'll go over to Dennis, if you'd like to give us your opening statement. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you. In a broad sense, I see changes on several levels. Organizations are going to move from more traditional to more innovative management solutions. Leaders are going to have to be business leaders. We'll see an increase in collaboration between organizations, especially between competitors. We currently see that as a result of the pandemic, as a matter of fact. It was a requirement for survival, business survival. Our security leadership need and must be business enablers more than corporate police officers. On a global front, climate and environmental changes and related concerns will impact private security deployments. Near threats will be exacerbated by instability from climate crises, such as seen in recent population migration examples with the US borders between Mexico and the United States and Syrian border examples. We've seen how climate-related disasters impact security resources. We've seen that recently in Canada with some of the recent flooding and mudslides, which have completely isolated communities and parts of the country, and really have stressed resources. Inflation. The massive spending by governments during the pandemic crisis will undoubtedly cause prices to rise. Security wages have traditionally been behind. So are we going to see a further stress on our HR resources? Who's going to want to become a security officer if the pay is just not there and it's not livable? Notwithstanding, more financially stressed employees are going to be rationalizing a need for theft and fraud, creating an increased need for investigations and security. So an increased risk and threat and risk to our organizations. Organizational resilience and technology will even be more important. Will organizations reevaluate just in time in their supply chain management? That will impact organization security deployments if companies return to more warehousing and increased inventory. Let's look at ransomware and other new creative and innovative cyber crimes that have been evolving. How to prevent, who are you going to call if it happens? What will public law enforcement be able to do to help? What we see here in some areas is that public law enforcement is just not equipped. So more roles for the private sector. New trends in misinformation, disinformation are interesting. Experts have now stopped using the term false news, replacing the language with misinformation and less used disinformation. COVID disinformation is predicted to impact GDP by 0.32%. Doesn't sound like much when it equates to approximately $8 billion just in the United States alone in 2021. It means a fair amount. Also, just going to relate one more thing, and that's the United States FBI most recent uniform crime reports showed overall crime decreased 5%, except for violent crimes. Homicides in particular increased 30%. perhaps indicative of the added stress of the pandemic and related issues. Working from home. Interestingly enough, most violent crimes occurred at home, 51% of them. I'll let my colleagues jump in at this point.
Okay, thank you, Janice. Some interesting points there, and we'll come back to those later in the discussion. If I may now go to Rinska. Rinska, would you like to make your opening statement?
Yeah, thank you, Janice. So the changing role of security in the world, I guess what I'd like to highlight is what that means for every individual security professional. How's your role actually changing in terms of what it was before COVID and beyond COVID or throughout COVID? So what I've observed is security was the fighting off bad people and protecting buildings and people from criminal behavior, etc. Now it's all become more a facilitating role. We're all worried about the same thing now. We've got this common enemy called COVID and health issues, and I observe that security people are actually more on the people side now and actually facilitating some of those fears and actually helping people through that whether it comes to scanning their QR codes or whatever it might be. But it actually it's more a role of keeping people also very comfortable in that situation that is highly stressful for some people, especially the vulnerable. So that whole human sort of aspect of the security profession, I think, has been really brought to the surface, which is excellent, and also not that easy, for people who work in that field to actually change so quickly and change gear. The second thing I'd like to highlight is the actual opportunity. Let's start with the fact that it's a threat, the threat of cybercrime and information security in the context of the past couple of years, but also before that, actually people working from home on sometimes not as secure Wi-Fi networks, etc. It's brought a whole heap of other information security threats to the surface. And whether you're in physical security or already in cybersecurity or information security, the security mindset is actually the same. It's looking for what don't we know yet. And especially in that information security field, that's the actual challenge. What is actually around the corner? Dennis mentioned ransomware. I mean, we didn't have that in our risk matrix as a threat before it first surfaced, whereas floods and fires and things like that, we know them, we've analyzed them, we know about their impacts, and we can analyze the likelihood, whereas some of these new threats in the cyber context are of course much more challenging. And I really, I can see a real opportunity for physical security professionals and managers to lean more towards that information security space. For example, through mechanisms like the ISO 27001 standard, which is not threatening in terms of tech talk. It's really about people and processes, and it's got that security mindset kind of interwoven into it. So it's a real opportunity for security professionals, especially also in the context of the more pressing need for securing data centers, physically securing data centers, which is that crossover between data and information and physical security, as well as, for example, the Internet of Things, where a lot more equipment is hanging now onto the internet, and we need to secure all those facilities that traditionally were just secured by guards. Now we need to secure them also in terms of their information security. So there's the second point. And the third point, I guess, is for security managers and professionals to start much more speaking the language of the board, of the senior executives, of board members. I still coach a lot of people on that topic. Still the image is that physical security people, they just live in that little office there next to the front door. They don't still find it easy to get into that boardroom and actually resonate at the right level to to verbalize, the issues in a way that makes sense to the board. So that's the third topic, I think, that is really important in the context of security and where the profession is going. So I'll leave it at that, but happy to explore that further, with the panel members or with yourselves if you have some questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Rinska. Can I encourage you to get your questions in? The usual button, question and answer button at the bottom of your screens. Now we'll go to the final panelist, to Mike. Mike, can you give us your opening statement, please?
Certainly, thanks, Jan. I couldn't agree more with my colleagues in terms of the cyber and information security threats perhaps becoming far more prevalent going forward. In fact, they've become far more prevalent year on year, I think, if you look at the data. But I'm going to restrict my answers to the UK and Ireland, although I suspect some or all of what I'm about to say may resonate with industry colleagues in other parts of the world. So the word unprecedented may well be one of the most overused descriptors of the past couple of years, but there's no doubt we've lived through and continue to live in unprecedented times. The pandemic has not left the security industry untouched, and we continue to see colleagues falling sick and suffering as a result. So I want to start by publicly thanking all those security professionals, wherever they may be, every single one of them, who've continued to support their employers and their clients as the pandemic has moved through society. And in turn, a huge thank you to their families for supporting them too. Those who work in this industry truly are key workers. Now, the challenges haven't gone away and new ones emerge, as my colleagues have alluded to. We're experiencing an increasingly shrinking labour market, coupled with real and sustained wage competition from sectors that haven't traditionally been in competition with the security industry. Businesses are going to have to think very creatively around what is going to attract quality recruits to them rather than someone else. And I'll go further and say that clients of security services have a role to play in this as well. If the ask of a supplier is to provide high quality officers, but the agreed charge rate doesn't allow for investment in those officers with, for instance, comprehensive training, which in turn aids retention rates, then those clients have little room for complaint when security companies are unable to recruit new officers. Security officers have in the past and are quite possibly increasingly going to fulfill the role of first responders. I think Dennis alluded to that earlier. In the event of major incidents or terrorist attack. And we're awaiting the outcome of a couple of ongoing reviews over here that will, I believe, have the potential to fundamentally reshape elements of the UK's private security industry. The results of the Prevent review, I actually struggled over that when I practiced this earlier, so I'm consistent at least. The results of the Prevent review, which is the independent review looking at the government's strategy for supporting people vulnerable to being drawn into terrorism, is due to report before the end of the year. We await that one with interest. But arguably, the more impactful one, if that's not a word it should be, is the public inquiry that was established in the wake of the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing, and that has already issued one report focusing on security, with a final report due in the fullness of time. And security businesses will undoubtedly be affected by recommendations the chair of the inquiry deems appropriate to make, the implementation of which could involve serious capital investment, which will need to be paid for somehow. And I haven't had time in this opening statement to mention professionalization and making the security industry a career of first choice, or the mental health and well-being of those working within it, or the pace and rate of technological advances. So the industry is undoubtedly living through unprecedented times on a number of fronts, with some very serious challenges for it to address. And some of those challenges could yet elongate that unprecedented period for some time to come. So we look forward to answering the questions from the group and seeing if some of our statements there haven't stimulated some thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much for all three panelists then. Got a number of questions coming in, but we're still going to have time for some more. If you could actually submit those, I'll try and get to them. If I could just look at one of the first questions now, it comes from Mike Gibbs. And I'll probably ask each of the panelists what they think about this, going in the same order again. So I'll come to you first, Dennis. So Mike says, during COVID, the world placed an economic amount of pressure on the network infrastructure and it held up remarkably well. We were so reliant on it. The next big thing could be a nation state takedown of parts of the web, or maybe someone launching an electromagnetic pulse leading to power loss, lack of internet, etc. What thoughts have you got on this kind of suggestions? Dennis, can I come to you first?
Absolutely, and I think Mike has brought up a great point in that what we should have learned from the pandemic and even some of the climate events that have been happening across the globe that have impacted either our infrastructure or our business is that we need to now be more innovative and creative in our evaluations of threats and risks. Is that why shouldn't we be convincing our authorities, whether that be within our organization or the governments, that the potential of such a threat against society could be real. Is that currently there are groups out there working on such a strategy of some way interrupting that vital link of communication. And so absolutely, that should be now examined and exercised and evaluated to the level of some methods of dealing with it. So I think that and many others. I mean, I think we have to be more innovative and creative in how we're evaluating threats and risks.
Can I come to you, Rinska, see what your views are on that question and comment that was posed by Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mentioned my big passion is business continuity planning. Back to pen and paper. You know, what's the manual workarounds? And it seems, on the one hand, we now finally have this massive awareness that it's not going to be always smooth sailing, and we could be disrupted by major events. So in some ways, my work has become much easier to sell out there. But on the other hand, the flip side is people now think, oh, we're all experts now. We work from home. We've worked it all out. We don't need business continuity plans because we're so good at this now. And I have been saying from the beginning of this, you must start exercising for that last piece of string. But, you know, the internet, your systems, the integrity of your system, the power failures, those sorts of events are now have now far bigger impacts, because in the past you could just say, oh, we'll meet face to face, or we'll go into a meeting room. Now some of those options are not even available anymore. We've become so reliant on those systems to be functional. So yeah, the strategy that I tend to follow is help people understand that COVID is on the one hand, it was actually an easy scenario in some contexts. It was slow onset. We had time to plan, go to the, I don't know, in Australia, you call it office works, you know, get your laptops, get your headsets, get your staff equipped with their network connectivity, all this stuff. You could do that over a number of days or weeks. Fast onset scenarios, on the other hand, you don't have that luxury, you know, an immediate lockdown of a building or an immediate power failure or a cyber attack where you don't have time to think, not even minutes, not even seconds. That sort of preparedness, and again, I come back to the role of security, who have that kind of readiness for something that can happen over seconds to come, is far more important these days, because we don't have that flexibility anymore. And especially, with that illusion of, oh, we can now relax because we can just send everybody home. Well, if you work in manufacturing or transport or all of those industries, there's no working from home anyway. And we need to have some preparedness. And I'm not saying make this a heavy, dark side kind of situation. I mean, use some humor and throw in some challenges, some actors and role plays and whatever, but get people on their feet actually working on this issue of business continuity, and not I think I would do this. I think I would just, go back to pen and paper. I think I would just use, a manual workaround that I tested 10 years ago. No, do it now. Actually rehearse that in a practical way and work together with security. I did this at the highest level of government in Australia the other day, where we actually physically locked down the building, tested the security element, but also actually started to see it. Oh, who actually needs to walk to Parliament House today? Oh, that won't fly because the building's now shut down because of this fake protest that we're simulating. It's far more important these days than it ever was. And yeah, the illusion that we're now so good at it, I think I'd like to take that away very quickly. So yeah, very, very good point raised by Mike there. So yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, thank you, Rinska. Can I just come to you just a couple of minutes, Mike, for your comments on Mike's question, comment?
Certainly, I think Mike raises a very valuable question, a very valuable scenario, and Rinska's absolutely right. Business continuity professionals are not going to be out of work anytime soon, and they shouldn't be generally. But business continuity and disaster recovery plans, we've tested them for the last few years, the last decade, decades. We've tested them, sat around a table. We've tested them, remotely. But for the last year and a half, we've actually implemented them and have been operating them. So the amount of data every single business has got is accurate, real, and valuable. So my pushback to people would be, go back to your business continuity and your disaster recovery plan. Here's what you had on paper. Did it pan out in practice? You've tested it, you've dry run it, you've war gamed it, you've red teamed it. But that's an what if scenario. You've now got live data. Did what you have on paper reflect reality, or the other way around? And don't be afraid to be radical when it comes to reviewing your business continuity, because the scenario Mike envisaged, a nation state takedown of utility or an EMP, that would negate 99% of people's business continuity plans, because it probably says, as Rinta quite right says, pick the grab bag up, take your laptop and run for the hills. You won't, a laptop will be about as much use as a doorstop, under Mike's scenario. So the scenarios that we have been planning for may have been poo-pooed by the C-suite as outlandish, and that's never going to happen. But guess what? It did. So don't be restricted by business as usual thinking when it comes to reviewing your BC and DR plans. You're just go back and review them. You've got to do that. Absolutely have to do that now.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I've got a question from Ewan Grant here, and I wanted to sort of combine it with something I wanted to ask. I'm going to come to you first, Dennis. And this is about, the future generation of security personnel. Ewan specifically asked, where do you see the next generation of private security coming from? Are senior officers in the police force in the various countries that you all operate in, are they the right people? What are your thoughts on this, Dennis?
Well, let's start stepping on some toes, I guess, huh? You know what? I don't think that we need to do the traditional looking at former law enforcement. And even though I have former law enforcement, I don't think that at all was that much of a qualifier, to be perfectly frank. Is that pretty much everything I've gained has been through my experience in the industry itself. You know what? Over the past 2 weeks, I've had the absolute pleasure of participating in some other events that had some young professionals, if I can use that term, and also another term I'll use is women in security, who presented themselves and entered the industry at a fairly junior level and progressed to a level of management, and we're currently running security organizations without any law enforcement background. In some cases, their academic background was actually not even focused on criminal justice or security management. However, it enhanced their ability to integrate with the business management of the organization. I applaud those people, and I think that's what we've got to do is encourage more of that. Is that one of the challenges that was presented is that what we lack today is there really is no career future for an individual that, say, enters the industry as a security officer, a security guard. I hate to use that term, but a security officer. There really isn't. Is that when that person's hired, they're not really presented with a career opportunity. They're presented with a job. Here's your job. If you're lucky, here's your job description and your post orders. And this is what we want you to do. Good luck. You'll get a paycheck every so often. And the professional development towards career development's not there. And there really isn't anything that says, you know what, someday you're going to be the CEO of this company. Where in many other organizations that exists. And we've seen it. We've seen where senior management, CEOs have even come from working the floor. So we're lacking. Where do we need to go? I think we need to encourage, work closer, again, collaboration with HR departments, with senior management to be able to encourage them that that position for security management in their organization needs to be somebody different. Colleagues, what do you think?
Rinska?
Yeah, I think it's the whole language around like how we've been brought up as security professionals. The whole language has to change. The whole playground has to change. The playing field. And especially the point that was raised in terms of that boardroom language. Maybe I can go a little bit practical here, but the board is not interested in the whole, what we call the FUD, you know, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Board members don't like to hear that. They like to have certainty. They like to hear facts, and they like to have it translated for them to business priorities, not technical or security or whatever priorities. They like to hear things in terms of euros or dollars, you know, and the impacts related to that. They like to hear things in terms of reputational impacts, and they like to hear those security threats in terms of compliance related aspects. For example, you talk about 3 priorities of a board or an executive, that's the kind of priorities. So as long as you don't translate security impacts and risks in those terms to them, you won't get that buy-in. Yeah, and so in a simple example, instead of saying, oh, we've got a huge reputational damage if we've got an incident, go into statistics, say, okay, for example, based on recent studies, we know that a security incident that is not under control within 2 hours, we lose 10 to 20% market share. That's what a board wants to hear, not we need to do this because there's bad guys out there, or any generic terms that are really security centric. Another thing it might be in terms of financial impacts, you know, a certain safety or security risk, the chance that it might happen is 5%. And if it happens, it costs us $10 million. That's the kind of language you need to start using. And I'm not saying it's simple because we didn't grow up with that as security professionals, right? But there's certainly people out there in your organization or beyond, or in associations that you can be part of, or, you know, listening to some OSPA's webinars, for example, to actually start building that lingo. So that's really super important, I think. And the other thing I heard the other day, which I really found inspiring, and that is the simple structure, even if you're usually giving reports on security incidents in a very tangible way, the simple structure you can apply when it comes to reporting to management or business team members or board members. First of all, facts. And that's what we're good at, right? Observations, incident reports, facts. That's what security professionals are good at. The next thing is, what are the risks related to those facts? But not just what are the people risks or the tangible risks, but actually what are the business risks related to those facts? So first of all, facts, then what are the risks of those? And thirdly, what are the recommendations then that board or the business management can do something with? So, because they want to see solutions, you know, and directions to take the business further, and not see it as some threat that is out there and that can't be fixed and that can only be reprimanded or countered by immediate actions. They want to see the survival of the business in parallel to all of that, or the improvement of that. So apart from the recommendations, I think you need to also think about what are the cost implications of those solutions that you're proposing as a security professional, and what are the value adds. So not just fixing or plugging a hole, fixing a problem or bridging a gap, but actually saying, if we do this, for example, we implement a fantastic security monitoring system, the additional benefits are, hey, we can actually now see that staff are more productive, or whatever, any value adds, not just the risk-based approach, which is great, but it's also about what is the business value. And that's, I guess, something that can take a few years to develop that skill, you know, but there's people out there that you can reach out to. So that's, I think I've sort of tapped into the last bit of that question that was asked. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Inska, and I agree with you on there that, you know, that security need to be getting a voice that is heard at the board. That's not easy in itself, but the only way to start to get towards that is to start to learn the lingo and to see how board receives this. I've done quite a bit of work on counter fraud, and we've got a similar sort of issue there, and it's a matter of partly not understanding it, but also not quantifying it. And when you start to quantify how much you're losing through fraud, same as for lack of security, the board tends to sit up and listen a bit more. I suppose the other side of that, though, I was thinking was really, though, it has a cost implication of things that you usually want to do security-wise. So I'd just like to come to Mike on this and think, well, really, how can you influence the security budget as being part of the security department? That's probably not an easy thing to do, but until you start to able to talk the lingo, to get represented at the board level, but also to have an influence on that budget, whoever holds that budget, and how you can sell what you want, that's really not going to solve that. Have you any thoughts on that, Mike?
He says he pauses whilst he thinks, and gives himself another 10 seconds to think. First of all, I just want to say Ewan's question, very good, future generation of security personnel, and questioning whether, you know, law enforcement officers are potential make good security officers. I think the baseline answer is they make no better or worse security officers than former military or people who've never served in a uniformed service. I think that there's pretty much good and bad everywhere. In terms of influencing the budget, we've over here in the UK, with every single trade association will talk about the professionalization of security, and that's what needs to happen. And Dennis, kind of alluded to it when he prefers to call them security officers rather than security guards. And there is a perception that security guards are, it's the sort of thing you'd see a throwback to the 70s, huddled around an oil drum, burning bits of wood to keep warm, trying to guard gatehouses and stop people coming into transport yards and that sort of thing. But it's a lot more sophisticated than that. And until we can actually get the message across, this is an innovative, sophisticated, critical industry. We can't then start to have the conversation around we need more money to invest in our people, in our solutions, and actually get an increase in the budgets. But to get that increase in the budgets, we need to talk and influence the buyers of security, because they're the ones who are ultimately paying for this investment one way or another. And as long as buyers put tenders out there that talk about 50, 60, 70, 80% driven on price, and the rest topped up with quality, the industry is never going to move forward or not going to move forward fast enough to be able to influence those decision makers that can buy on quality rather than on price and get the tangible add-on benefits that Rinska talks about and that you talked about, Jan. So what we have to do here is speak with one voice and speak the same message. And unfortunately, that's going to involve a bit of a sea change in attitudes and mindsets within our industry as much as within the buyers of security. And it needs a speedboat turn in a supertanker. But I rather suspect we're going to end up with the supertanker and have to slow it down for 5 miles before we can turn it round and actually change direction. It's one of the biggest conundrums this industry has ever faced, and I don't think we've solved it yet. But I think speaking collaboratively and with one voice is key to making that happen.
Yes, and as we've said before, this is going to need some amount of cooperation between competitors, as I think Dennis pointed out earlier on. If I can just come to you with one final question now, then, if you could spend about a minute or so just discussing no more. What do we really see then as the barriers of there's willingness within the security industry to be seen differently, to do differently, to progress. So what are the barriers that's actually stopping this happening then? And really, what, if anything, can we do about that? If I can just go in the same order as normal. So if I can go to you first, Dennis, just a minute or two on that before we wrap up.
Yeah, you bet. We're our own barriers. I mean, we're our own worst enemy. I mean, we don't promote ourselves well. We complain very well, but we don't take that issue and then bring it forward to a collective resolution. Is that we have a hard time working together, although we are perhaps one big happy family in a professional association. Truly, we're not in the real world, and that's a key part of our problem, I believe. Is what's interesting, and I gave some kudos on my LinkedIn page to this organization. There was a security company, private security company, that is in the security officer business, and through the disasters that have recently happened in Western Canada with the floods, mudslides that have killed people and isolated communities for weeks, there was a security company that actually chartered a helicopter, put their logo on the helicopter, and flew in supplies, life-saving supplies, to these communities. That hit the media. That did a lot for security relationships with the general public and organizations than anything in the past few months that I've seen anywhere else. We don't promote the right things about ourselves. And those are the sorts of things that need to be promoted more. And organizations need to do more to get to be that in sync with business and to get business buy-in. That's just one example on my part.
Okay, thank you, Danny. So, Rinska, can I come to you for sort of final comments?
Yeah, sure. I'm very inspired by hearing the other speakers as well, and just the importance of this issue, because the skills are there, the background is there, the actual knowledge is there, the commitment is there, but it's just the translation of, you know, getting into the lingo of that business environment and the decision makers. Peer-to-peer mentoring sort of started coming up in my mind, like as in not so much mentoring younger professionals, but actually thinking, who has that business skill and who can I find within our associations and networks or in my organization that can coach me on that particular topic of how to translate, you know, security, bedazzling facts that we all know in security, you know, a long list of incident reports and all the technical detail. Who can help me translate that into business terminology and help me prepare for example, if I have to present to a board. The key thing I think is give the executives, the decision makers, the business people less to process, less information, but actually more reason to listen. I guess that is the main two things to remember. The translation to those business benefits. So I'll leave it at that. But thanks again for the opportunity to share this important, very important topic.
Okay, thank you, Rinska. And finally, to you, Mike, what comments have you got?
So barriers to progress. I couldn't agree more again with my two co-presenters, Dennis and Rinska. They're absolutely spot on. But the over-commoditization of our services has to stop. We're not a kilogram or a pound of apples or oranges. We are an innovative professional industry that secures critical national infrastructure the world over. And there isn't a country anywhere in the world with a private security industry that could effectively deal without it. If the industry evaporated overnight, there would be elements of their critical national infrastructure that would not be secured, and they could not secure it through either their law enforcement capability or their military capability. We are that key to pretty much every country's sustained development. And we are essential to the safety and security of national assets with an unrivaled range of innovative integrated solutions. And the sooner we start talking that message up and start doing it uniformly and loudly, then the sooner we will be heard and listened to.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Well, it's been a very, very interesting discussion. I certainly think in some ways that the pandemic has provided an opportunity for the security industry, and it's just a matter of now continuing the importance that was shown during that and actually moving forward. I think it's just come at the right time to actually move the agenda forward in security. And I think it is a matter of, like you say, though, they're very poor at promoting yourselves and the things that you can do to do that, and to start to talk in the business lingo, and to be viewed more as actually critical to the organisation's business, not just for the risks and the sort of an add-on security part. So thank you very much to all the speakers. Just before we wrap up now, we have just got a few notices. The nominations are still open for the OSPAs for Ireland, closing date of the 6th of December, for India, closing on the 10th of December, and for our new country, New Zealand, closing on the 14th of January next year. And this time, we've got a number of events going on, 2 virtual events on the 6th and the 14th of December. Got the Techers and the Cyber OSPAs, and then hopefully in February our first physical event in a long time, the UK OSPAs on the 24th of February. And we'll be doing all this again next week when we'll be looking at security and journalism. How are we able to influence the media to represent the security industry a little bit better in this? So thank you again to each of the panelists. Thank you to you, the audience, for your questions and participation and attending today. May I thank in the background, Christine and Hannah, my colleagues, and wherever you are in the world, have a good rest of the day. Thanksgiving for those of you celebrating in America, and wherever you are in the world, stay safe. Thank you very much. Goodbye.